All right, let's just jump right into it. Today, we're unpacking a comprehensive, deeply researched analysis of Vladimir Putin's life and his reign. We're going to trace this absolutely remarkable evolution from a post-war Soviet street kid in Leningrad all the way to a modern autocrat attempting to fundamentally reshape global borders. By cutting through all the noise, we'll zero in on the actual mechanics of his power, his geopolitical strategies, and the historical context that completely forged his worldview. Let's get started.
Now, the central question for our explainer today is a big one. Is Vladimir Putin an aberration? Like, is he just a unique product of the late 20th century? Or is he simply a symptom of Russia's deeply ingrained political culture? Because we're talking about a culture that for centuries has relied heavily on autocracy, centralized power, and the rule of a strongman, from the Tsars to Stalin, and now to Putin. Keep that specific question in the back of your mind as we trace his ascent.
Okay, Section 1, Product of the Soviet Union.
So picture this. It's 1952, and Putin is born into a city that is still completely devastated by war. He grew up in this cramped, rat-infested apartment in Leningrad, and it was fighting in the city's communal courtyards that taught him incredibly early on that life is basically just a brutal, constant fight for dominance. But he performed well enough in school to earn a chemistry diploma. He eventually went on to study law at Leningrad State University, and by 1975, he actually achieved his dream of joining the KGB. After a solid decade of desk work, his big break finally came in 1985 with a foreign posting to Dresden, East Germany.
But honestly, that Dresden posting? It would define his worldview in ways he never could have expected. On November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. From his little outpost in East Germany, Putin helplessly watched the rapid, total disintegration of the exact system he had sworn to protect. Returning to a collapsing USSR really cemented his view of those events. To him, it wasn't a liberation. It was a supreme national tragedy and a massive humiliation that he would literally spend the rest of his life trying to reverse.
Moving right along to Section 2, a meteoric political rise.
Guys, his ascent was just shockingly rapid. Within a single decade, Putin went from being a middling, recently recalled KGB agent to the actual president of the Russian Federation. He started out as an official under his old mentor Anatoly Sobchak in St. Petersburg back in 1991. By 1996, he was in Moscow, managing these massive state asset redistributions. His intelligence background obviously made him a very logical choice to head the new FSB in 1998. And then, just a year later, an ailing Boris Yeltsin named him prime minister. By 2000, Putin had secured the presidency. I mean, it was an absolute masterclass in bureaucratic maneuvering.
You might be wondering, why on earth did the Russian public just accept him so readily? Well, the contrast was basically night and day. The 1990s under Yeltsin meant severe economic crisis, widespread lawlessness, and what felt like national humiliation. But the 2000s under Putin, that era brought a massive economic boom, which was largely fueled by rising oil and gas prices. Think about it. If a new leader suddenly brings stability, prosperity, and a renewed sense of national pride right to your doorstep, you might be pretty willing to overlook a few democratic rollbacks. That incredible economic luck granted him the massive popularity he needed to start dismantling Russia's nascent democratic limits.
Which brings us to Section 3, Consolidating Autocratic Power. Putin utilized a seriously ruthless toolkit to maintain his autocratic grip. First up, he completely tamed the billionaire oligarchs of the 90s. He did this using selective punishments for anyone who defied him and massive rewards for those who played ball. Second, he boldly manipulated the Constitution itself. When he hit his two-term limit in 2008, he just installed his ally Dmitry Medvedev as president, took the role of prime minister to stay in de facto control, and then simply swapped back into the presidency in 2012. And then there's the truly chilling pattern of dealing with direct threats, the lethal use of nerve agents like Novichok against opponents like Alexei Navalny and double agent Sergei Skripal. All of this alongside a much broader strategy of totally crushing domestic opposition by placing fierce loyalists in power all across that vast nation.
Now get this. Officially, Putin's presidential salary is a pretty modest $100,000. However, widespread speculation suggests that mass embezzlement and the quiet acquisition of state assets have secretly made him one of the absolute wealthiest people on Earth. We're talking alleged hidden billions, a massive Black Sea retreat, a $500 million super yacht, and a fleet of luxury vehicles that are often conveniently registered under other names. His personal consolidation of wealth essentially perfectly mirrors his consolidation of political power.
All right, Section 4, Rebuilding the Empire. Let's look at the totally stark difference between his major military ventures. Back in 2008, he tested the waters in Georgia.
It was a short, swift victory that lasted mere days, and it resulted in Russian control over the supposedly autonomous regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Fast forward, and he basically attempted to use that exact same playbook in 2022 for the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, fully expecting to capture Kyiv in a matter of weeks. But he severely miscalculated. He miscalculated his own military strength, and he completely misjudged the immense resilience of the Ukrainian forces, who were backed by unified Western support. The result of that miscalculation? A highly attritional, incredibly devastating conflict.
And it's crucial to understand that the Ukraine invasion wasn't just some spontaneous decision. It was backed by literally decades of preparation through what we can really call the energy trap. By heavily pushing projects like the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which was completed in 2011, Putin intentionally made Europe, and particularly industrial powerhouses like Germany, highly reliant on cheap Russian gas. So why does that matter? Because he assumed that economic dependence would completely tie Europe's hands, preventing them from pushing back against his expansionist wars.
When you trace the actual escalation of the Ukraine conflict, it reveals a deliberate, slowly tightening grip. In 2013, when Ukraine started moving closer to the EU, Putin applied intense pressure, which sparked major protests. By 2014, he rapidly annexed Crimea and kicked off a proxy war in the Donbass, cleverly masking his actions as just regional separatist support. The tension really ratcheted up in 2018 when Ukraine pushed to actually enshrine NATO membership right into their constitution. For Putin, that was an unacceptable encroachment. That steadily building momentum is what ultimately culminated in the catastrophic decision to launch a full-scale invasion in February 2022.
And finally, Section 5. An uncertain future.
Lately, though, we're definitely seeing some real cracks forming in his previously invincible image. I mean, we all saw the truly bizarre and shocking June 2023 mutiny by Yevgeny Prigozhin and his Wagner Group mercenaries as they marched directly toward Moscow. Then there are the devastating military casualties and horrific atrocities, like what happened in Bucha. That led directly to a historic International Criminal Court arrest warrant in March 2023, which has severely limited his ability to travel globally. On top of all that, he is becoming increasingly reliant on navigating totally unpredictable American politics, specifically the volatile dynamics leading into future diplomatic encounters, like that highly anticipated August 2025 Alaska summit.
There is a pretty direct, chilling parallel here between Joseph Stalin and Vladimir Putin. When Stalin died in 1953 without an heir, after having eradicated literally all his rivals, it triggered a massively prolonged, highly dangerous leadership crisis. Today, in 2025, Putin is 72 years old, and despite all the rumors out there, he appears healthy and could potentially rule for decades more. However, he intentionally fails to groom a clear heir. He's constantly playing his ministers against each other just to maintain his own absolute supremacy. That deliberate succession void, it virtually guarantees divided chaos whenever his reign does finally come to an end.
So that actually brings us right back to our opening thought. We've explored the gritty rise, the ruthless consolidation of power, the calculated wars, and now the massive vulnerabilities. So what's the ultimate takeaway for us? Is Vladimir Putin an aberration who completely derailed a potential democratic future, or is he simply the latest inevitable manifestation of Russia's deeply ingrained autocratic political culture? It's a heavy, deeply complex question for sure, but understanding the exact roots of his power is really the only way to make sense of the geopolitical realities we're all facing today. Thanks so much for joining me as we unpack this explainer, and definitely keep asking these tough questions.